let's move on now to life after high school. So you graduate. What happens then? You get married or go to school or?
I got married eventually, but not very fast, not very soon. No, after high school, I guess there wasn't the kind of sports recruiting, maybe there was, but it wasn't up in this area. Sports recruiting going on, particularly for hockey, that there is today. I mean, it's nuts today, but it was very little in those days. I did talk, 3 coaches came to Roseau after my high school year, and school was still on. University of North Dakota, University of Minnesota, and St. Cloud. And there were no scholarships or anything in those days. North Dakota wanted me to come to North Dakota and play hockey and football. Hey, I know Dale Kelly made it and made it good, but I realized that, I wasn't big enough. I was quick, but I wasn't big enough to think about football, so that kind of let it out. And St. Cloud was in an outdoor rink. My brother went there, but they played in outdoor rinks, and they'd had those. And Minnesota, the one stipulation I had to them is I had been reading or whatever, seen in the newspaper that there was a football player from Ohio State, football player that was wearing contact lenses. So I just told Minnesota, Marsh Ryman, the athletic business manager, was with Doc Romness, the coach at the time. I said, if you'll get me contact lenses, I'll come there, and they did. They got me contact lenses during my freshman year, and that's what got me to go to Minnesota.
Interesting.
But there was no freshman hockey at the time. And during the fall of the year, the team was loaded with Roseau players and one from Warroad that was Dick Roberts. And I'd known Dick from before. And so I would just pile in with them. At that time, they played. When I went to the University of Minnesota, there were, to my best of my knowledge, 2 indoor ice rinks in the Twin Cities. The Minneapolis Arena out in DuPont and Lake Street out in the south part of Minneapolis, and then the St. Paul Auditorium. The University of Minnesota practiced and played their games at the Minneapolis Arena. So every day at whatever time the practice was, 4 o'clock or whatever, the Minnesota hockey players would grab taxi cabs, or after a while the coach would drive a bus. And I'd sneak in with them and practice with them. But that Minnesota was on the quarter system at that time. And after the first quarter, the freshman hockey team started up. And of course, that's what I was as a freshman. So they just kind of gently told me that I'd have to be going outdoors to practice at the time. And I was kind of struggling at school at the time. The only thing that really, not struggling, but I wasn't used to the size and that kind of business. The one thing that kept me there during my first quarter of freshman year was Dick and Marty Roberts. They had just been married, and I can't remember how many nights I'd spend the night over there, not the whole night, but I'd be over there eating rusks and drinking coffee with Dick and Marty, you know. And that kind of kept me there. But I went home at Christmas time and I wasn't going back. You know, I figured I'd play with the Rosal team in the States Dominion League, which was big time for all of us up here at that time. But I tried out for 2 different hockey teams in the Twin Cities in the fall. One was the American Amateur AAU, the American Amateur Athletic Union, which was the governing body of everything. I mean, figure skaters, skiers, whatever. And then the American Hockey Association, which was a new branch, kind of. Well, I made both of them, went home for Christmas, and I got a call from the American Hockey Association to come to Boston because I was made their tryouts. And so I went out to Boston, and I went with that team. The AAU team also went to Europe.
Now, would this have been for the Olympics then?
This is for the, 48 Olympics.
Okay.
I'd made 2 teams. One, I mentioned, and the one that called me first was the American Hockey Association, which is the governing body of all of this today, okay?
Yep.
But it wasn't in those days. It was just a hockey organization that had sent teams to Europe in previous years. But I got the call first so I went out there, but in the interim I also got notice that I could go with the AAU team, but I was already committed to the American Hockey Association team, so I went with them. When the Olympics, which at that time were in St. Moritz, Switzerland, the AAU team went to St. Moritz. The American Hockey Association team went to Europe and played hockey games all over Europe, okay? That's the organization I was with. So when it came time for the Olympic Games, who's going to play? Well, they solved the problem by playing the games but not having them count in the overall Olympic status. And the team that played was the American Hockey Association team, the team I was on, simply because they were affiliated with the International Ice Hockey Association. And none of those teams would play the AAU team. So that was a big problem, but we played in the games. I didn't play an awful lot because I was a little punk 18-year-old or whatever. And most of the guys on the team were military veterans, Army pilots, and you name it, you know. There were 4 Minnesotans on it. Bob Baker from Thief River Falls, who was a couple of years older than me. Bob Baker, Bob Besser, Al I forgot, I'll think of his name when I get out of here, who was a graduate defense from the University of Minnesota. They were all older than me, and most of them were veterans, been in the World War II. And so I played, but got to see Europe and eat a lot.
Okay. How did things change then in 1952? Because
okay, so after that mix-up, there were some influential people affiliated with the American Hockey Association. A big one from Boston, who at one time owned the Boston Celtics. Walter Brown was his name. And then an administrator that ran all of USA amateur hockey, Tom Lockhart, out of Minneapolis, no, out of New York. And then Bob Ritter, who was a Harvard graduate, and don't ask me where he was from, but he lived in St. Paul. They worked it out so now, in the future, the American Hockey Association, whatever name it went under, would be the team that picked the players right to this day that play on the Olympics. And that's the big umbrella. That's the umbrella that's running all of our non-high school hockey today is the American Hockey Association.
Yep. Good. So in 52, did you go through tryouts or anything for a team?
In 48, we had the tryouts. One was in Minneapolis, one was in the St. Paul Auditorium, and that was the AAU team. The American Hockey Association team in 48 had tryouts in Minneapolis Arena and Boston, okay? In 52, the tryouts were at the Minneapolis Arena, the University of Minnesota Arena for the West, and then someplace out east, I don't remember where it was, out east. And from those two tryouts, you brought the Western players that had made the Western team out to the east, and from that they came at. That one ended up being more of a balanced situation, about half of Minnesota's, I wanted to say half Canadians, but half Americans, half Minnesotans, and half Eastern kids. At that one, Guinea Christian was at the trials, and I was hoping he should have made it. But at the time, he was out of hockey. He was in, that's, if you remember back to those days, what was going on big, the Korean War. And Guinea was in the National Guard down in Camp Rucker, Alabama, or something like that. So, but I played on a line with Guinea in the 1955 World Championships. That was the prelude to the 56 games. He was my line mate.
Oh.
So, and good buddy.
Okay. How about your coaches? You haven't mentioned coaches for the 48
Yeah,
and
I
52
knew you were going to
games.
ask me that. I should have looked it up on the iPad or something.
Okay. That's okay.
In 48 was a fellow by the name of Al Guyberg or something like that, from out east, okay? And the only thing I can remember about that, I don't know who the manager was, but the trainer back in those days, the equipment manager, trainer, good God, don't get hurt, was a guy by the name of Jock Semple, who was an Olympic runner on the Boston Marathon, not Olympic, but a runner on the Boston Marathon. He was a real Scotchman and really, he was a Scotchman in his language, and try to get a hockey stick out of him. So that was all I can remember from that one. But in 52, the coach was Connie Pleben, who was UMD coach at the time, and the manager was Bob Ritter.
Okay.
And his very efficient wife, Kathy, was with, and they traveled. I remember that trip the best.
So tell us about how you traveled to the Olympic Games. You traveled to Europe. Did you fly or?
Yeah, in 1948, we went over by, like I mentioned a little while ago, by ship. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary. I don't know which one went which way, but it was on both of them. England's luxury liners had been used as troop ships in the Second World War. 5 days. Seasick, 5 days. Second time we went over in 1952, we flew. Landed in Newfoundland, Gander, Newfoundland, for refueling. Pitch dark, but it was dark there, I guess, all winter long, you know. I used to know when I played and was at Taconite, there were some of the Taconite Hornets that had played or had worked up in Newfoundland, and it was all, you know, it was all dark the whole time. But it was airplane, and then another one that wasn't Olympic, that was the 55 World Championships. That was airplane, and that's the one that I played with Guinea Christian. He was one winger, I was the other one. Yeah.
Where was that held at?
That was in Germany, in what they called the Ruhr Valley, the iron steel. Don't ask me the towns. Dortmund, Cologne, Dusseldorf. Okay. Those 3 towns.
Mm-hmm. Good. How about?
That's where the Russians first came in. That's the first time I played against the Russians once, and that was there.
Okay. Yep. Talk about the rinks you played in the Olympics.
Well, in 48, I guess 48, when we played in England, an indoor rink. When we played in France, Paris, a big Coliseum, which was indoor for everything. Looked to me like at the time that it was big in bicycle racing or something, you know. In 48, the rest of the time, outdoors.
Okay.
Man, oh man, I remember playing in Czechoslovakia. I'm going to talk to you about something in Czechoslovakia. This is a historical event. In Czechoslovakia, when we played there, at night, the bleachers were so high, tall up, you know, you'd be looking way up in the air at the people. Now, mind you, I'm 18 years old, so 6 feet was pretty high. But anyway, we traveled around Czechoslovakia by train. And on one train trip, for several hours, the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia was on the same train and sat and visited with us for hours. His name was Jan Masaryk, and his connection to the USA was that he'd married an American girl. This was right at the time that the Soviet Union was taking over all of those, whatever those countries are called, you know, satellite countries. No matter where we traveled in Czechoslovakia, no matter where we traveled, if you went out to eat or some of the older guys went to a bar or something, there'd be a plainclothesman sitting off someplace. Kind of keeping track of you, you know. It wasn't so long, probably when we'd gotten back, I don't remember if we were still in Europe or not, but Jan Masaryk was fighting, of course, to keep the Russians from taking over Czechoslovakia. But he committed hara-kiri, I guess, by, they said, jumping out of a building. He jumped out, you know, like I would jump out, baloney, you know. So that was a historical event. So I learned something.
Interesting.
That was, so, and then in 55, of course, we flew too.
Okay.
And landed in Newfoundland.
Okay. I've seen pictures of outdoor rinks that they played in Europe in the earlier days. They were covered. They had a roof over them, but the sides were all open. Yeah, you see some of that. Nothing like that, though, at that. We played in 52
in Garmisch, Germany, a resort area. Man, it kind of reminded me of the snowstorm last night, except the snow had really come down, but it was never cold, and there were big flakes, you know. They'd be out there during the period trying to scrape the ice with scrapers, and so.
Yeah. So,
but,